Hello and welcome to the Wheel Talk podcast. My name is Abby Mickey and we are here to talk about women's professional road cycling. Today, I'm so excited. We finally got Gracie back on the pod.
Hey, it's been a little while. Been looking after less exciting men's cycling, and then I got sick, so that's why my voice probably doesn't sound so good today as well.
We've missed you. We've really missed you. We're happy to have you back. And Matt Deneve.
Hello. Also good to be back. Thank you very much.
Well, we've got an awesome episode for everybody today. We got some really great listener questions, so we're going to talk about those in a second. But first, we're going to start out the episode. Someone suggested we do a mid-year review and talk about some of the races we've already had so far this year. So we're going to do kind of a summary, I think, of the spring classics and the first chunk of stage races. And yeah, I think that'll be a great way to set us off. So, Lee Mango. Also, Matt suggested I say names, and I'm going to butcher names. I'm putting you on the spot, Matt.
Oh, people love to hear their names read out, don't they?
And we love that people give us questions. So thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. It's really awesome to get people involved in the podcast. But I apologize if I can't pronounce anything. As you guys already know, I have a hard time with pronunciations. I don't think anyone ever questions that. Mid-year review. Should we start out with our favorite races so far?
Yep.
I feel like mine is an easy answer, and that is Tour of Flanders for me. Was, I think, maybe my favorite race of the spring. There was a lot of standout races this spring, and I think overall, if you kind of skim through the results, there was still a lot of SC Works victories. SC Works Pro Time victories, but the Tour of Flanders stands out as just such an incredible race for the tactics, the fumbles, the winner, the person who won, the person who got second place, and there was so much that happened in that race that I think both sums up what happened prior to that race and races that came before it, and also gave us like a little bit of a taste of what was to come in the future weeks. So I think as far as like a storytelling narrative goes, Tour of Flanders was... You couldn't have written a better race on that day.
Yeah, that was my pick too. No surprises there. I just thought the whole spring was great. We anticipated it to be a good season, predominantly because of the Olympics, but I think just the level of women's cycling the last couple of years was, that it was foretold that this season was going to be a good one, and it completely delivered. Every race I felt like had something great to talk about, and but yeah, it was so hard to go past Tour of Flanders. I think that was just epic, and the way, especially that last 20-30 kilometers played out, was just so exciting. I think that was one of the best women's races I've probably ever seen, and I was so happy that I actually got to commentate it as well. Bridie O'Donnell and myself, who commentated it here in Australia for SBS, we were just like on the edge of our seats, like had the biggest smiles on our faces, and after the race was over, we were like, holy shit, that was so good. They did our job for us. All we had to do was just speak to the images, and yeah, it was just one of those days I think goes down in history, but also I guess the way that Trek really, and this might answer another question later in this episode in some ways, in that they weren't necessarily the strongest. For sure, they had two of the strongest bike riders in the race, but they weren't the clear out and out favorites, and the way that they worked together to deliver that result was just exceptional and like absolute textbook of teamwork and execution of a good plan. So yeah, it was awesome to watch.
Pretty hard to argue with that. I feel like the ones that I wrote down were more selfish picks, things that I enjoyed seeing personally. I really enjoyed being at Paris-Roubaix to see the finish of that, and being able to be in the velodrome there with Lauren and record a podcast from the infield there was pretty special. And yeah, I thought Kopecki's win there was great. Karsha's win at Flèche Wallonne was amazing. Such a fan favourite, and getting to see that first win on the road, a big win on the road in 5 years or whatever it was. And then just from an Australian point of view, I think going back to January and seeing Sarah Giganti win TDU, I know it's not the biggest race on the calendar, but it was just a really nice full stop on a really turbulent journey for her, and getting to be there to see that and see her family there and everything was really cool. And then also from an Australian point of view, Grace Brown's Liège win I think was just pretty spectacular as well. So that's more of what I enjoyed seeing rather than maybe amazing racing or anything like that, but they're the ones that stood out for me.
Yeah, I have to back you up on those ones, Matt. They're such good picks. Cassia's win was the only one that made me cry, and Grace's win was the one that made me the happiest. I was just over the moon for her, and like that was a really exciting finale as well. So I think I said it on the podcast back then. I rewatched that 10K in different chunks so many times to be like, how the hell did that all unfold? So another good one for the history books, but also a good one for homework for any rider that wants to go back and see how you can win a race and play off your own strengths. And also, I just wanted to say that Matt and Lauren's podcast at Roubaix was probably my favorite podcast of the year. So I thought that really added so much value to coverage. You know, it's just so nice to get that excitement on the ground, and I was smiling while I was listening to that.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
I agree. I loved your guys' podcast from Paris-Roubaix. I felt a little bit of sadness that I couldn't be there with you, but one of these years I'll make it to that race. And I think that Kopecky winning that race was a moment that just kind of felt right in the season, and also the way that she took that win was pretty incredible, coming from so far back on the track and just like powering her way to that victory, even if she was maybe out of position going into that sprint. I feel like that was a really, really good win, even if it did add to the tally of SC Works Pro Time wins, because like there's nothing wrong with them winning so many races, and they do spread it out. Normally this spring was a very like Kopecky Wiebes heavy, but it's always nice to see like a variety of different teams winning. So I think that, you know, but if Voss, on the other hand, if Voss had won Paris-Roubaix, you know, she would have won the second most number of spring races of the spring season, I think, tied with Kopecky. So it's not like it would have spread it out that much. If it had been Pfeiffer Georgie, completely different conversation we'd be having right now. But yeah, that win by Kopecky at Paris-Roubaix Femme was one that was really, really awesome. That race just kind of delivers an incredible addition no matter what happens. And this may have been the more tame addition in terms of just like chaos out on the road, but the win itself was still pretty incredible. And then, I mean, Cash's win, La Flèche Wallonne is a race that it always just comes down to that final climb. No matter what happens in the kilometers before the Mur de Huy, it's basically all for naught when you get to the base of that climb. It's always going to be the strongest climber. But there were so many tiny moments to pick out in those final 20 kilometers before they got to the Mur de Huy. So many things that went wrong for other teams, and just to see Kasia win that race, I mean, it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of her, and to win that race in the style that she did a couple weeks after getting second at Flanders was just such an incredible moment. Even if the race itself wasn't one that we could have talked about for hours, the win itself was. And I think the same could be said of like Amstel Gold. What a weird race. Everything that happened on that day was just bizarre, but for Voss to win it after she won Omloop Nieuwsblad earlier in the spring, which was like an incredible story in and of itself, coming back from surgery in the off season and kind of a disappointing 2023, and then winning the first spring classic of the year. That was another like incredible moment. And for me, I love to see Voss win out year after year. It just feels like she's a fixture in the sport, and I don't really want that to change, at least not yet. And so seeing her win Omloop Nieuwsblad and Amstel Gold was awesome. And yeah, I think for Grace Brown in terms of storytelling and story arcs throughout seasons that span different seasons, for her to win Liège-Bastogne-Liège was such an incredible story. And Matt wrote a really good story about that as well on the site after the race. That was
also got to speak to her a few days after that, and she kind of broke down the last 10K or most of the race actually in a really interesting way that I thought showed that elite athlete mindset and how you reflect on things and how you learn from them, and Yeah, I thought it was really good. She was very introspective and interesting. So if you want to go back and check that out, you can find it on the Escape website.
Overall, I think it was one of the best spring seasons we've ever had on the women's side. A lot of factors contributing to that. The rising professionalism of teams in general, multiple teams, the pressure of an Olympic year, the pressure of many, many contract years, just a lot of things came into play to make the spring one of the best ever. With like a lot of the time we would go into the races and sure you'd have like Kopecky as the favorite, but you didn't really know how it was going to play out. And it made for really good racing.
How much of the feeling that it was a great spring was down to the fact that Little Trek really took it to SD Works Pro Time and probably were the best team of the spring? Like, was it just that the racing was great, or was the fact that we had a bunch of different winners a big part of that?
Yeah, I think that's probably hit the nail on the head there, Matt. I think just the rivalry and the will they, won't they, instead of everyone against SD Works, it really made for much richer racing experience as viewers and commentators. But yeah, I think, last year it was so close, like Trek was so close to being that team, and then they just had a bit of bad luck, not enough riders. So this year it was just nice to see them pick up a bit more luck, because they've obviously got the talent. That wasn't the issue last year. It was just, sometimes got to get that timing right, and they got it right this year. And then, like, unfortunately, SD Works had a bit of off timing as well. So it was just almost like a shift in that balance there between those two top teams.
I think the only thing that could improve on this next season is if there are like two other teams that step it up, and we have 4 teams kind of fighting against each other. And there's always going to be teams that favor the stage racing, and there are always going to be teams that favor the spring. Like Visma Lisa Bike is a team that loves the spring, and I think next year they're going to have a roster that is probably going to be a little bit stronger when it comes to the Spring Classic. So they might really be a feature when it comes to next season. And we've already talked about the transfers and how that's going to change the team dynamics of each of the teams. But I think that Little Trek really bringing it to SC Works Pro Time this spring definitely helped the spring feel like it was something special. And I think part of that was going into the season knowing how good SD Works was last year, and that not much had changed in our minds going into this year, and that we were just going to see a repeat, because all we knew going into the spring was that they hadn't changed their roster at all besides adding Femke Gerritsen. So it was just going to be another SD Works Pro Time sweep of everything, it felt like. And then when that didn't happen, when Voss won Omloop Nieuwsblad, it was like, oh, wait, things could be different. And that kind of was only proved right as, Balsamo won Bruges de Panne, and they weren't there. But that's kind of beside the point, you know what I mean? It's just like we were teed up to think the season was going to go a certain way.
Unfortunately, the stage racing season so far has been a bit more like last season, right? We've had, 4 stage races in Europe so far, the World Tour stage races, and SD Works have won all 4 of them. And I don't know what you guys think, but it kind of feels like we're going to be seeing a bunch more SD Works Pro Time stage race victories over the next few months as well.
Not only did they win all 4 of them, Matt, they swept all of the stages of 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a bit biased because I love the classic so much, but I've definitely watched these stage races with less enthusiasm.
I mean, I think it's just like you just don't. We just want to see variety, right? But I don't think it's nothing against the team itself. Like, I think that needs to be made clear that it's nothing against SD Works. It's just that the racing is so much more exciting when we see multiple teams win. And like the Vuelta was great. Even if Demi destroyed everyone when it came to the GC, each of the stages was awesome. And like Ivica Music's win stands out above a lot of them as a moment that was one to remember. But I don't think that that's going to continue, because one of the reasons that they have had such a strong run is Demi coming late into the spring season, having done kind of the bare minimum, and coming into the Spanish stage races just flying, way more so than riders like Elisa Longo-Borghini, who did more of the spring racing. And I think that means when we get into the races later on, like, I don't think that the SC Works Pro Time dominance of the spring block, of the Spanish block of races, is going to be how the Giro goes. The Giro has been a race that they've kind of struggled to perform at. Don't tilt your head at me, Matthew. The Giro's been a race that they've struggled to perform at in the last couple years, since Anna van der Breggen retired, pretty much. And I think that is a race that is still wide open, because we don't know if Demi's going to do the Giro. I wouldn't be surprised if she did, honestly, but that's a race that, you know, is one that, like Evita Music, she looks primed to win that race, for example. And when it comes to the Tour, like, it's a different course this year. It's going to be a different race, we think. So I don't think it's like we now are settling in for the rest of the season being the SC Works show, because there are so many riders that sat out those Spanish races. Like Elisa Longo-Borghini didn't do the other 2 Spanish stage races, for example. Kasia had to leave the Vuelta early and then hasn't raced since. And she's coming back for Tour de Suisse. So I think that there's more riders that are going to come back after a break and be able to challenge SC Works. And Demi can't keep that form going. She's not racing now, but I would be surprised if she's able to continue that form and not kind of dip a little bit before leading back into the Olympics and the Tour.
That all sounds great to me. I hope you're right. I can't see anybody beating Vollering at the Tour. I mean, yes, there's more to the Tour de France femme than just who wins the race overall, but I think if we're talking about overall victories, I can't see anybody beating her if all goes right. And the Giro is definitely more open. I'm very curious to see who they take. We talked a few weeks ago about Marlon Reusser wanting to go to the Giro to target the GC, and I don't know, how realistic that is, but Niamh Fisher-Black will be in the mix there as well, you would think. And then Trek takes Elisa Longo-Borghini and probably Gaia Riolini as well. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting, and I certainly hope that you're right that it is more varied than it has been for the Spanish block and for Ride London. But yeah, plenty still to play for.
What about some breakout riders?
Oh man, we've had some great breakout riders. For me, mine is maybe like one of the riders that I think had a breakout spring is maybe low-hanging fruit. But I do feel like Shirin Van Anrooy made steps this spring that are notable, because she's been a good rider. She won Trofeo Alfredo Binda, of course. But winning Trofeo Alfredo Binda and being like a deciding factor in the winning move at Tour of Flanders and finishing third when your teammate won is something that is absolutely not to be compared to a Trofeo Alfredo Binda win. They're 2 races of 2 different leagues. And so I think for me, she was one of the breakout riders of the spring and definitely contributed to Little Trek having the spring season that they did.
Yeah, 100% agree. She was on my list too of, it's not strictly a breakout ride, because she's been coming good for a couple of years now, but yeah, huge step forward this year. And it was like, Flanders was the best example, but how her and Elisa Longo-Borghini played off each other in some of the other races as well was like they were the dream team duo for Trek that really made the racing against, especially SD Works, but some of the other teams as well, really exciting. So yeah, I think she is going to be capable of a lot in her coming years, but certainly an interesting rider to watch this year so far.
Yeah, and there's a few riders that we've talked about a lot in recent weeks that deserve another mention. And these maybe stretch the definition of breakout riders, but they're certainly riders that have had, if not the best years of their career, then right up there. Caroline Swinkels was excellent throughout the spring, and then third overall at Burgos as well, so has carried that form into the stage racing as well. Talita de Jong we mentioned, who has been around for a long time, but on basically any measure you want to look at, it's been her best season of her career. Letitia Paternoster has been great. Again, more of a building of form from her, but some very strong results. And then, I feel like I need to fly the Australian flag as well. I feel like Neve Bradbury's second at UAE Tour was a real breakout moment for her, as well as third at TDU. And we mentioned Sarah Gigante before as well, but I feel like she's taken a step up as well. So, none of them are really riders that we'd never heard of before, but all had taken steps up this season, I think.
For sure. They're all on my list as well. And notable mention to Loretta Hanson. I have got my fingers and toes crossed for her to get an Olympic spot this year for Australia. I think she's taken a massive step up again in her career, and also a super valuable contributor to that Little Trek success so far this season. And again, not necessarily breakout, but you have to definitely tip your hat to those big steps forward by some of these riders, and especially on such a tough year to do so.
I think another rider maybe worth mentioning that we haven't talked about a lot on the podcast is Kim LaCourte from AG Insurance Soudal, who didn't have incredible results, but she finished 10th at Paris-Roubaix, which is a very good result for a pretty new rider to the World Tour scene. She's been racing for a bit, but she's new to AG Insurance Soudal this year, and she only started racing at this level she raced in 2016 on Biscaya Durango, and then took a couple years off from racing at this level. So she's a rider who I think with more experience will only be more impressive, and definitely worth a mention.
I was also impressed by the Norwegian rider on Liv Alula Jaco. I think she could definitely be classed as breakout this year, because I've not really seen her name too much in the past. Ingvild Gaskin, I think that's the right pronunciation, but please correct me if I'm wrong. And it's same with Paternoster. It's nice to see that Aussie squad that I'm an alumni of finally kind of getting through a tough few years and picking up some good results again, and having some nice development riders coming through that are, showing some good promise.
We also had riders that, like Yara Castelline, who won a stage of the Tour last year, but I think we saw kind of a different side of her this year, where she was a lot more aggressive and a lot more active in the races. And multiple riders on Phoenix de Koonik, I feel like, qualify for that. Puck Pieterse obviously had an incredible spring season coming off of her cyclocross season. And I think the list of new names to keep track of, or riders that have been around for a couple years and are just now coming into their results, it was long this spring, and even in the opening stage races as well.
And for any young or developing riders listening, I think it's good for us to point out not just the breakout stars or the youngsters, but those people that have been knocking on the door for ages, because cycling is one of those really difficult endurance sports that can take many years to finally crack it. And even someone like Casio, who was a star in the past, to go for 5 years or so without getting a win, and then taking a really big win, it was such a good story, but also such a good example of, if you really are passionate about this sport and you really believe in yourself, you just got to keep knocking on that door for year after year, and you've got to really stick up for yourself, I guess, too, because I think a lot of people will lose faith in you, and they're the kind of people that are going to be giving you those contracts or race leadership in the team environments. And that was something that I learnt too, is you've got to keep telling people what you believe and what you want, and keep trying to prove it. And it's really hard mentally, but I think if you just keep that persistence and patience, often you do get there. And for a lot of us who are not necessarily physiological freaks, it just takes a lot of time to get strong, and for all those puzzle pieces to come together, and that little bit of luck that you need at the end.
Yeah, totally. I feel like it's easy to look at someone like Demi, who really only broke onto the scene in 2020, and think, oh, it doesn't take that long to be that good. But like for the average person out there just trying to do the sport that they love, it's years and years of dedication. And there are going to be more setbacks than there are successes. And that's something that I think that gets glossed over on social media, but is like very, very true when it comes to professional sport. And like, look at Sarah Gigante. Like she had such a rough couple of years, started this season with a win at Tour Down Under and an incredible performance on that final stage. So there's just, yeah, it's just about time, putting the time in.
Yeah.
The same person, Lee Mango, asked if you could be on one team this season, which one and why?
I was trying to think about this. I kept coming back to Phoenix to Koenig. I think that would just be it seems like a fun young team. They weren't afraid to take risks this year. They've got a bunch of talent there. They were kind of, I don't know if they had any like really strong team plans sometimes, but I think when you're at that level, and I think we've touched on that once or twice before, you can just play a little bit more of an open game and see how the chips fall sometimes. And I think that could be an exciting team to be a part of at the moment if you're talented, if you're in good form, but you not quite sure, how you're ranking, I guess, in the pro peloton, to just race with a little bit more risk and see what rewards come from that. So yeah, I think that would be a pretty cool team to be a part of in lots of different points in a career.
I thought about them as well. They just look like they have a lot of fun racing their bikes, and that's not really, obviously every team wants to win, but sometimes you just got to throw it all at the race, and I love that they do that. For me, I thought about it, and being a part of a team like Little Trek would be incredible, but I think for me the answer is just so easy that I would love to be part of FDJ Suez, which again, I don't think anyone listening is going to be shocked in the slightest, but what I love about them so much is the whole team's commitment to a single plan and a single rider. And it was so easy to see the way that they backed, Avita Music at the Vuelta, and that a lot of the times they take responsibility for the race, even if maybe they shouldn't. And, I really admire their belief in each other and their belief in the goal and their belief in the plan. And I think that that's so important. And for me, for every team that I was ever part of, the most magical moments were when everyone on the team worked for one common goal. And I think that that's something that FDJ Suez does really, really well. Whether they win or not, they're all in for what they've decided before the race starts.
Yeah, I think that's a really great quality.
They've also got the best press officer in the business as well, which helps.
He's one of the best, yeah, for sure. Absolutely true. What about you, Matt?
I'm going to continue the theme of talking about Sarah Gigante's TDU win. I was really heartened to see how happy she was at AG Insurance Soudal, and there was a really cool moment after she won that Wollonga stage where she was talking about how in the pre-race meeting, the team plan was for her to attack, a kilometre up the climb or 2Ks up the climb, and she was like, no, I'm going to go from the bottom. And Servais Knaven said afterwards, the DS said afterwards, that he was very skeptical of the plan, but he was like, well, I need to back the riders and new rider to the team, but he backed Sarah's plan, and it ended up working out brilliantly. And I don't know, there's been plenty of talk about that team and kind of management and how that's affected things, and I'm not sure how much effect that would have in the team, but what I saw from them at TDU and the vibe that they had, not only with Sarah but with Ali Wollaston, and how they got around each other, just seemed like a really good environment. So yeah, that'd be my pick, AG Insurance Soudal.
All right, we had a question from Jeff Desmond. And I was really excited to ask this one to you, Gracie, because I feel like, I don't have a good answer for it, but can you talk about a time when your team were not favorites to win, but set out a plan and executed it? Was there a time when you changed tactics mid-race based on a developing situation and your team took the win?
Yeah, they two very good questions. And I was trying to rack my brains. It's amazing how much you already forget in your years after racing. There's a couple of moments that stood out, being part of some historic wins, not myself necessarily, but doing the women's tour of Britain for the first time in 2014. We got Emma Johansson to win the stage one, and she beat Marianne Vos, and that was pretty cool. But I was trying to find some footage of it because I couldn't actually remember how that stage went. I just remember that, we put her in a good enough position, and she fought all the way up this drag uphill sprint finish and managed to best the best. So that was a really good feeling. And then a time where we were the favourites, but we had to pivot. There was probably quite a few of these, but one that came to mind was when I won stage one of the Bay Crits in Australia. I wasn't supposed to win it. I was the lead out rider, and I was just super fit, and I'd done my job for the stage. And then I saw going into it's a hot dog, that first race, it's in a car park, and it's just like always the scariest one. And I could see going into that very last corner, I'd kind of just swung off, and I saw that it was all going to shit. And so I just put the gas back on, and I just dive bombed everyone. And I just sprinted out of that last corner, and I won. So it was good for the team, but probably it was good to get the win. But it was a little bit tense after the race in how we'd won it, and that it was me instead of the person that we were trying to lead out. So yeah, that was a good memory for me, but maybe not for some other people.
I can think of multiple times that things were going poorly and we changed the plan mid-race, and they still went poorly, but maybe just slightly less poor. There was a time when at the Redlands Classic, I was there with Rally, and there was a break up the road, and with one of our riders in there, and then I bridged up to that, and then we were supposed to be riding for somebody. The break was just getting too big, so my DS was someone needs to bridge, and we were supposed to be working for someone in the peloton, but then they just let the break go, and then we were like, well, shit, now we're racing against people we can't beat, and there's no way that our leader is going to be here when the when the finish happens. And I ended up working for her, and then she didn't win. Maybe she got fourth or something, but it was still a really exciting day because we got to kind of make the calls ourselves, which was fun because you don't have radios or anything in that race. And then, and then there was a race in Colorado, the Colorado Classic one year, where the rally team was just so strong, and Sarah Poitevin was incredible, and I was on a different team that year, and I knew that there was no way that we were going to beat Sarah. So even though the DS didn't tell me to attack, I felt really good at one point, and so I did, and I managed to stay up the front solo for most of the race until Taylor Wiles and Sarah caught me, and I finished third. So it didn't actually end in a win, but it was still a better result than we would have gotten as a team had the race gone any other way. But I feel like I can mostly just remember times when, it was a dumb plan and it did not work. And we were favorites. We were always favorites to win the race, especially on rally. We were always favorites, and it never went to plan.
I like that you've kind of touched on the race radio stuff, because there's been points in my career where I've been in races without radios and had to make decisions myself, and they've not always gone well, but they sometimes did go really well, and either me or my teammate got to win. And then there's been other points where we've had to change plan in the middle of a race with radios, and the DS gave some poor instructions, but when you're kind of in the red, or a bit confused, or you're not backing your own instincts, and you take that advice, and it doesn't feel quite right, but you do it anyway, and then the situation just gets worse. That's been a few good learning points for me, to just realize you're the one that sees the race the best. You're in the box seat. Like, just you're allowed to. You should make those decisions yourself, and try and discuss as much as you can. But you can't really have a conversation over race radio very well, and you might only have one teammate with you in the break, or there's situations like a stage of the Tour of Qatar is coming to mind, and the crosswinds are just crazy. You can barely hear yourself think and breathe, let alone be talking to anyone else in those stages. And I got some bad advice one stage, and I completely just ruined the day. But I was frustrated at the director, but mostly I was just frustrated at myself, because I wouldn't have made that same decision if he hadn't given me that instruction. So yeah, I think as much like we talk about looking at your Garmin too much, you're looking at your power numbers and stuff, like, you got to learn to think for yourself. You got to learn how to ask those questions, why you would do something. You got to think about the motivations of the other teams. And like, that is such a huge skill in cycling, is thinking on your feet, on the bike, and doing it by feel, and not just waiting to be told what to do.
Yeah, I mean, we can pretty much always just point to the Tokyo Olympics as an example of like racing on feel, and they don't have radios there, obviously, and communication is like what you put into it, basically. And I agree, and I also think that when it comes to criticism of radios, which is like a very popular criticism from viewers, the impact that radios have on racing, I think more so on the men's side. For me, like, I don't think I ever once raced a race where the radio actually made a difference, because it's quite hard to hear what's going on in the radio. Like, the car maybe is too far back. For me, I was always racing, especially in Europe when we were racing in races with radios, the car was way too far back. We couldn't hear anything that our DS was saying with all the World Tour teams in front of them. And then like there's also just like, there's static. Imagine trying to listen to a headphone with the volume turned pretty much all the way down while there's a bunch of wheels spinning around you and other languages being spoken. It's like really, really hard to actually hear what's going on. So I feel like there are definitely times when the radio does make a difference in racing, what the DS is saying. But the most important thing about the radios is when DSs point out an obstacle coming up, a roundabout, a fallen lantern rouge, I can't speak, like something in the road, a giant puddle, I don't know. And or like, yeah, if I feel like there's very little points that I can pick out where the radio made a difference in team tactics. And I think that has to do with the teams I was on and the directors I had. But I feel like there's still a lot of things that I watch at races when I'm like, oh, there's no radio involved in this situation. This is race instinct, for better or for worse.
Yeah, and I think we saw that a little bit this year. We were speculating as to whether Demi Vollering had very good information this year compared to other seasons. And yeah, it's like, I think that was also a good example of like, well, you have to be a complete rider, and that's part of it, is, you know, knowing how to handle all race situations, if you have a radio or not. And like, I completely agree. I think safety wise, we need radios. I don't think that they should be excluded, but you just have to learn how to race without that tactical information.
In 10 years' time, when this season is behind us, the first question that I'll ask Demi Vollering is what happened in Liège-Bastogne-Liège.
No, I've got nothing. I
guess this question is hard for you to answer.
yeah, I haven't been in too many professional bike races, to be honest. So I've watched plenty, but I haven't been in many to give you a good answer. So I think you two did a great job.
Hannah Nicklin asked us about the Olympics. She said it's a bit far out, but basics on the course, what kind of race it is, and what's informing selections. In the last week, we've had a couple national teams announce their lineups for Paris, and I think those are only going to come in thick and fast over the next couple weeks. So maybe worth digging into a little bit of the course before before we are asking like why were these riders chosen. And I think first I'll just touch on the course. I talked to one of the DSs I know who has gone and pre-ridden the course on townie bikes, and mostly the finishing circuits, because I think that's going to play a pretty big role in the finale. There is one massively steep climb, 90 kilometers to go, that is like basically just a wall, and it's pretty short, but she pointed out that that climb is only 20 kilometers from the circuit. So if there's any selections made on that climb, it's hard to chase from there until the start of the circuit with the technical roads into Paris. But then once they enter the Paris circuits, some of the roads are very, very narrow. Especially one of the climbs is really, really narrow. There's like a screaming fast descent off of it. And a lot of it's in the city of Paris, so there's some technical turns and stuff like that. It's a course that she said could be compared to maybe Trofeo Alfredo Binda in terms of the toughness of the climbs in the final circuit, but the width of the road is constantly changing depending on where you are on the course. And what they're going to do about all of the like furniture in the road is something that she was curious about, because there is a lot of road furniture and obstacles in that final circuit. And she said that it could kind of be compared to Glasgow, but they do less circuits of it. So while the course itself is maybe similar to the Glasgow circuit, because they do it less, it's going to wear on the legs less and possibly won't be as selective. I think it's going to be somewhere between maybe Trofeo Alfredo Binda and Glasgow. So maybe we're looking at like a reduced group, maybe 5 or 6 coming into the line. But there's definitely enough climbs in there to make it interesting. And I think previously this course was looked at as a sprinter's course. And I don't think that that's far off. But I do think that if you're going to look at a sprinter to win the race, that Wiebes is maybe the only one who could tackle the circuit. And even then, she's on the cusp. And when it comes to the Dutch team, I mean, we can talk about it. The Dutch selection is out. The Dutch selection will maybe surprise 0 people. And that's that Demi Vollering and Ellen van Dijk will do the road race and time trial. The other 2 road spots are Lorena Wiebes and Marianne Vos. And I think there are riders that definitely missed out on that selection, but based on the course and the experience on that team, it's not that surprising that that's who they're taking. And like years previously, specifically Tokyo, the biggest rivalries are coming from within the Dutch team, with Vos kind of being a favorite for a course like this, given her experience and her ability, what she's been able to do this year. And Wiebes, who is the fastest sprinter in the peloton.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be like as fraught with tension as it was last Olympics between Van der Breggen and Van Vleuten and the others who are on that team. But I think that, yeah, it's always a talking point no matter who gets picked for the Dutch squad. And as much as I love and respect Marianne Vos, she's not actually that well known for being a team player, I hate to say. Not that she's like rides super selfishly. She just has like that white line fever, and I think she just can't even help it. So I think if she sees an opportunity, you know, to take the win, of course she's going to take it. But like, yeah, I think that having Ellen van Dijk on that squad is probably, she'll be the glue in a lot of ways. But I actually just don't think that this course is that hard. I've been trying to read a few comments here and there and some people that have gone out and ridden it, but like it's only, as far as I can tell, 1,700 meters of vertical climbing, which is actually not a lot these days. Even 2,000 meters is like, it's not that challenging anymore for the women's peloton, whereas that used to be, you know, pretty decent. And I feel like Wiebes has shown that she can get over climbs. Abby's right. I think she's like the favorite for all the sprinters because of her abilities. But I think that it's going to be really hard to dislodge her. And I think it would be crazy for the Dutch to not have her as plan A.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that too. The thing I would say though is the last 10, 15 Ks of this circuit looks very similar to the last 10 or 15 Ks of stage 1 of last year's Tour de France Femme, where there's a climb that peaks 10 Ks to go and Kopecky got away and won solo. So it's about the same gradient as well as that climb. So I don't know how that looks if you've got Vollering chasing her, if you've got Wiebes there as well, etc., not on the same team. But that certainly made me take interest, was that climb there, and I think that's what Kopecky will be looking at as her chance of victory. She could also win it in a sprint, obviously, but I think those last climbs will be decisive, and I'm very curious to see how the Dutch play it if Kopecky does try and go away there, because you feel like Vollering will be the one that would chase, and then hope for the others for a sprint. But I think it's going to be interesting, and yeah, the intra-team rivalry on the Dutch team, or the intra-team dynamics will be very interesting, and then Kopecky is a wild card, not to mention all the other teams as well. I think it's going to be, pretty fascinating.
And it's always such a weird race because of the numbers of the field and the breakdown of the teams. So, yeah, I think, of course, the Dutch will be always one of the number one talking points for how to beat them, but who's going to win out of them. But I think once we get a few more teams listed, I think that's going to make the conversation more interesting, because then we can start to think about or talk about what are the other strengths and motivations of other teams, who has the strength to chase or to go with certain attacks and stuff like that. So it's such a different race to what we're used to. It's not teams of 6 going at it against each other. It's like such a weird breakdown of numbers that, I think lots of different scenarios can play out.
Yeah, and only, 2 or 3 other nations have officially announced who will represent them. France announced last week that it'll be Juliette Labous, Audrey Cordon-Legault and Rago, and Victoire Berthaud of Cofidis. And I think the big surprise there is Evita Music being left off the roster. And when it comes to team selection, every single nation has a different process to decide who is going to be on that team. We've talked a little bit about the US criteria. Like for them, the TT spots, for example, the second TT spot not going to Chloe was just whoever wins nationals. Actually, on that topic, Joe Lindsay did an awesome interview with Taylor Knibb, and she said she's not racing the road race. I don't know how that's going to impact the US, whether or not they're going to be able to figure out the allotment of spots and filling someone in there, but that's a conversation for a different time. But when it comes to deciding who represents who, like for a country like France, I believe it's coach's discretion. So the coach will take into account the results and the riders in question, the course itself, and then they decide, and there's no give at all. For countries like the US and Canada, I believe also you can arbitrate for those spots. But some nations have it broken up in percentages, like 30% of it is your one-day points in 2024, 30% of it is coach's discretion, 30% of it is your UCI ranking over the last 2 years, and then 10% of it is, something else. So there's like many, many, many different ways that the nations decide who is going to represent them, and some nations have more on the coach's discretion and the team coaches decide, and some nations have it more based on results and points. And with some, you can get an automatic selection if you win a World Tour race or something like that. So it varies depending on the nation. And
I do feel for Evita Music though. I mean, Olympics is already a massive deal for everyone, but being a home Olympics as well, and I think she could rightly say that she deserved to be there based on her performance so far. But yeah, as you said, there's a lot that goes into that decision, and the time trial is a big part of that. So maybe that worked against her a little bit, but yeah, I feel for her. It'd be a bitter pill to swallow, that one.
Yeah, her statement was pretty clearly, she was pretty upset about the selection, and I think, yeah, I mean, like she said, there's nothing she could do. It's not like other nations where you can try to arbitrate, but even then, like, once a decision is there's really nothing you can do.
That's that's one of the sad things about the Olympics is, yes, we're seeing the world's best athletes compete at this globally lauded event, but we all have to remember that the athletes we're watching, there's an equal amount, if not more, that also deserved to go, who are also the world's best, and either politically or luck or whatever is the factor that prevents them from going. So it's one of those events that can really impact an athlete's fulfillment in their career. I've seen plenty of athletes over the years feel like they weren't successful because they never made the Olympic team, and it's such a shame to come away from your career with that as one of your criteria. It's such a great thing if you can qualify and go to the Olympics. It's really special, but it's also, I think, the importance that we place on it across all sports that get to go to the Olympics is an unmanageable weight for a lot of people, and unfortunately, yeah, I really feel for athletes that don't get to go that did deserve to go, which is a lot.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the darker sides of the Olympics, but definitely the impact it has on athletes, both athletes that get selected and also athletes that go. There's a brutal come down for a lot of athletes post Olympics who get to go, who like have been building toward it their whole careers, and then it's just over. So as far as like a sporting spectacle, it's something. And I think this year, I hope this year we have a really exciting race, but there's definitely a lot more to it than just a bike race.
At least athletes don't have to do 2 weeks of hotel quarantine after the games this year.
Yeah, seriously.
Matt, like the come down I had was like quite intense. And I had a good experience. I won't go into the story, but like when Tokyo happened, all I could think about was I can't, like, it's unethical to put people into hotel quarantine after that. Like it would be awful. Like, but athlete well-being is getting much better managed these days. It has a bit of a way to go, but yeah, it's not all glamorous. Doing the Olympics and the whole process of it. So I am trying to spare a thought for those people that are going through the process right now, because it's pretty tough.
Have you seen the cardboard beds for this year's Olympics? No. The IOC is trying to dissuade athletes from their post-competition activities that, I don't know, people may have heard about happening a lot in the Olympic Village. So their beds are all cardboard. I don't know how that's going to dissuade anybody, but I don't know. I thought it was funny.
That is funny.
I just had one final thought.
Hearing about...
Sorry, please go on.
Yes. No, you go.
I was
going to talk about condoms. You should definitely talk about something else.
I was just going to say about the Olympics, I find myself interested about the time trial as well, and we'll find out more about this as we go on, but I think, obviously from an Australian point of view, seeing how Grace Brown goes there will be fascinating. Seeing how Ellen van Dijk goes in her comeback to the sport. The reigning world champ Chloe Dygert, how she goes. I think there's a whole bunch of storylines that kind of conclude at that time trial in Paris. So I'm curious to see how that goes as well.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting, and I think some really good stories are going to come out of it, Matt, like you said.
Abby, keep going with your story. I'm curious now.
Nope, I'm not going to tell my condom story. I didn't go to the Olympics, but I have firsthand accounts from many people of things that they saw, buckets that were sitting on tables.
There's like bowls in the dining hall of condoms, but like if you go to grab some, like you get a standing applause from whoever saw it. So
athletes are just like a bunch of high schoolers, and then you put them all into the Olympic Village, and it's just like, yeah, it's exactly what you'd expect from like a high school football team, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, the time trial looks pretty good. It's like a relatively flat course with a little bit of undulation, and it's all in the city of Paris. So there are definitely some technical aspects, and I think that it will be a fantastic race. And I'm excited to see how Ellen Van Dyke can do 10 months postpartum, which is bonkers. We have one more question from Dan, but I think we will save it for next week when it's Gracie, Lauren, and I talking about the Tour of Britain, the Women's Tour of Britain, the women's tour, which is now the Tour of Britain Women. So we'll save Dan's question, and we'll wrap up this episode with what we're obsessed with. I can start. I'm visiting my family, and inevitably that always includes watching our favorite movies. We've watched A Fairy Tale, a True Story, which is a fantastic movie about fairies and two little girls. We've watched Josie and the Pussycats. That is a plus movie, and the soundtrack holds up. I listened to it on my run this morning. 10 out of 10 soundtrack. And probably my favorite of the movies we've watched was Hook, which is just such an amazing movie. And I love that movie so much. And every time I watch it, it makes me cry and also makes me laugh. And yeah, big fan. So I'm obsessed with revisiting your old favorite movies with your family.
I like that. There's some good ones in there.
I'm glad to hear they still hold up, Abby, because I feel like it's pretty common to go back and watch old things and they don't stand up, and some childhood memories can be ruined. I've certainly had that in the past, so glad to hear they stand up. Josie and the
Pussycats definitely has some questionable moments in it now, as does Hook, but overall the vibes hold up for sure.
Being sick, I've watched a shit ton of TV the last 10 days, and so I can give 3 reviews of 3 series that I've already burned through. I reckon I've even watched more TV than that. I can't remember. Slow Horses, that was really good. It was like a spy thing, like a MI5 British spy show. I really enjoyed that. So I would give that a good 9 out of 10. The next one was Bodkin, which was funny, and it was like just a 1-season series about people trying to make a podcast about a true crime. So that was good because it was like a good piss take of people that make podcasts. It was set in Ireland, which is, I always enjoy anything with an Irish lean on it. So that was also a good 9 out of 10. And then I watched something called The Veil, and it has Elizabeth Moss in it. And I'm usually a big fan of hers, but I think the maximum I could have given it was a 6.5 out of 10. It was quite well done, but just missed the mark a little bit, and I just wasn't as like engaged with it as like Slow Horses. So yeah, it was, if you're into spy stuff or thrillers or dramas, I don't know if I would recommend that one, but yeah, it wasn't too bad. So that's a lot of TV that I've watched lately.
Just wait. Once the baby's born, for the like first 2 weeks after the baby's born, you're just gonna be binge watching TV with your headphones in.
Oh, I know. I feel like I've already wasted a bunch of series before the babies even come out, because I wasn't expecting to be sick, obviously. So I've got to put a few other things on the list. I might go back to rewatching some old stuff though, just so I can feel good. It's a bit like what you've kind of said with the movies. I think when you just want to be nostalgic, or you're feeling a bit flat or tired or whatever, it's nice to actually go back and rewatch stuff. And I don't usually rewatch many things, but there's some things that I'm definitely going to go back just so I can feel good.
Matt, got any obsessions?
Yeah, all the talk of TV series and things you want to rewatch makes me think of 3 Body Problem, which I actually watched a few weeks ago, but I've been seeing a bunch about it in the news and hearing a lot of people talk about it, and I want to go back and watch it again already. It's a Netflix adaptation of a Chinese sci-fi trilogy and a series of novels that was written probably 15 years ago, I guess. And the first book of that has been adapted for Netflix, and they did an amazing job with it. Really, really beautifully done. Great visuals, great storytelling, great changes to the text to make it more appropriate for TV. And they've just approved, Netflix has just greenlit the show for the last 2 seasons, which will cover the last 2 books. And anybody that's listening that's read that trilogy will know that the books get wild from here in terms of the terrain they go into in terms of sci-fi, like really hard sci-fi, really fascinating stuff that reading those is kind of a life-changing moment for me, and I can't wait to see how they adapt them to screen. They've got a very big task ahead of them because some of the stuff is just almost impossible to visually recreate, so I'm curious to see how they do that. But yeah, 3 Body Problem, I can't wait to rewatch it again. And if you love your sci-fi, cannot recommend it highly enough, both the books and the TV series.
Ooh, that one's been on my list, but I feel like I haven't had the brain power to give it a good crack, so I'm looking forward to trying it out. But would you recommend reading the books first before the show?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think either way is fine. They are different enough that you'll enjoy both. But actually, thinking about it, maybe read the books first because it'll give you enough of a grounding that will really help you enjoy the TV series enough. I've heard some people that watched the TV series that found that it was a little bit disorientating how much was going on. So having read it first might give you a bit of a leg up. And I certainly didn't dislike knowing what was going to happen. That didn't affect my enjoyment of the TV series at all. So yeah, the books first, I think.
Well, give me a few years once I get past babies.
So speaking of adaptations, Matt, have you watched One Piece on Netflix?
I haven't. I've heard some good things about it. It's a live-action remake of a anime, right?
Yeah, but I give it a 10 out of 10. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it.
Have you seen
very fun watch.
Any of the original anime?
A little bit of it, and the Netflix version is definitely little kidded down from the original anime, but I don't know. It's very the casting is phenomenal, and they just have so much fun.
Yeah.
It's a really fun watch.
The original anime spanned more than 1,000 episodes. It's kind of legendary for how deep it went. So there's part of me that worries that I'll watch it and want to dive back into the original stuff and then just get overwhelmed with that. And I've also heard that the Netflix one is
the time.
Yeah, I do not have the time. I've heard that the Netflix one is a bit strange, or it takes you a little while you have to kind of let it take you where it's going to take you. You got to let it do its thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's definitely true.
Oh, I'll put it on the list.
All right, well, thanks you guys so much for chatting with me today. We'll be back next week to talk about Tour of Britain, which starts on Thursday, 4 stages, and I'll do a full preview in the Wheel Talk newsletter. So if you don't subscribe, you don't have to, but it exists, and it's on escapecollective.com, and you can check that out and see the full preview of the Women's Tour of Britain. I'm never going to be able to say it right. The Tour of Britain Women, it just feels wrong coming out of my mouth like that. It's in the wrong order. So we'll be back next week. Thanks so much.